Welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast, the show about building a healthier relationship with modern technology. Now here are your hosts, R. Blank and Stephanie Warner.
Okay, today we're doing a few things differently. Okay, we're doing them a lot differently. So for this episode, not only do I get to slide into the host seat, but I also get to interview our own R. Blank to discuss his experience being invited, interviewed, and dare I say, groomed to be a non-expert expert guest on the Dr. Phil show. That's right, Dr. Phil. So, the topic of the show was microchipping humans for various use cases. We're going to go through the whole process with R, spend time discussing what he learned about how EMF topics are covered in the media. This is a very special episode of the podcast and one you won't want to miss. So, without further ado, R, are you ready?
Sure. Let's get into it.
All right, let's do it. So, my first question to you is why you? Why do you think they chose you? Is it the business you're in, the content we produce? Do you think it has to do with your father's legacy? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I can't say exactly, and I don't even know how many people were involved in deciding to reach out to me or whom they may have reached out to earlier. I do know they mentioned this podcast as one reason. So I assume it's my ability to talk. They had that on record. And obviously they knew about my work with Shield Your Body as well. One thing though, and to that point in your intro, they specifically told me they didn't want a scientist. They wanted someone who could just talk normal. And so that's, again, I don't know how they found me. I guess I should thank my SEO team and my podcast production team. But that's that. They specifically said they wanted, I don't know, they didn't use this exact word, but for lack of a better term, a normal guy, but someone who could talk, but not a scientist.
Right, yeah. So, before we get into kind of the gritty meat and potatoes of this interview, I'd love to share one of the most fascinating elements of this experience with one of the things I found the most fascinating about this whole process with the rest of our audience. So we're going to go ahead and roll a video, and we'll play it, and then we'll come back and chat about it.
Hello, Dr. Phil. I'm R. Blank. And surgically implanting computers into humans is dangerous. Just how dangerous, we don't know yet, because that's how they release technology. As long as it doesn't kill you instantly or almost instantly, it's deemed safe for sale. And then it's 5, 10, 20 years later, we learn that it causes cancer, autism, birth defects, and more. But by that point, we've become so dependent on the technology, we choose to live with the disease. At this point, we know a lot about what EMF does to the human body. But these exposures, these are crazy. We're talking about literally inside the body, point blank range with zero distance, day in, day out for years on end. What impact will that have? We don't know, but I can tell you it won't be good. But look, let's take EMF out of the equation. Let's look at this from the perspective of technology. How often does your computer crash? How often do you lose access to some critical piece of information or functionality because someone, somewhere, halfway around the world, inserted an errant line of code? Do you really want your body running on that? How often do you upgrade your phone, your computer, your television? Every year? Maybe 2? Do you really want to have to undergo invasive surgery every year or 2 just to keep your body current? Earlier this year, I read about a company, Second Sight, made an amazing piece of implantable technology that literally brought sight to blind people. So what's the problem? The problem is they went bankrupt, and 350 of their customers were about to lose their vision again. Now, fortunately, in that instance, someone came along and acquired them. But what happens next time? Do you really want critical bodily functions dependent on the stability of a startup? Look, humans, like all life on Earth, were designed to evolve at a certain speed. A speed that is much, much, much slower than Apple's or Tesla's release cycle. That slow speed, it gives us resilience, it gives us durability, it gives us stability. It has a quality of design that modern technology cannot meet. By entering the era of cyborgs, and that is what we're talking about here, By entering the cyborg era with the same speed and recklessness that we did with cell phones, we are inviting a massive disaster of human health.
Woo! All right. So, I noticed a slightly different tone in this video than anything I have witnessed, any content I've seen you produce. And I'm sure our audience probably hasn't heard this tone from you either. So, what were you talking about in this video, and why were you so fired up?
Right. So, well, all good questions. That was, I forget now, but like the fifth or sixth take of that video. So what happened was after they reached out, and we can talk about that whole process, but they had me do a quote unquote audition. So I had to record like a minute or two of my thoughts on the topic, which, by the way, if you listen to the video, they had told me I could talk about human embedded computing, not microchipping, because that's what I talk about in the video. And those are two different issues from an EMF perspective. But anyway, so I submitted a first video, and the first video sounds a lot more like what our listeners are used to and what anyone who's attended an SYB webinar is used to. And I guess that was good enough for them to ask me for a second video. They told me they had, for some of the other panelists, they had to turn them away because it was so painful to watch. So that was good enough. And then they kind of coached me. Now, they didn't coach me on what to say. They made it clear that I had to, they wanted me to say things I believed. But it also became clear, like, well, I needed to talk as though I'm talking to Dr. Phil's audience, right? Not to an SYB webinar attendee or the Healthier Tech podcast listener. And so as time went on, actually by the second video, I kind of nailed it. And after that, they asked for little tweaks, like, can you take off your glasses so we don't see the ring light in it, and things like that. By the way, that for me was a big sacrifice. I don't actually like going on camera without my glasses. I can, it's like a subtler Drew Carey effect. But anyway, I did all that. And so by the second video, they approved me, but then they had me do like 4 more takes because they're like, not only did we approve you, we want this on the air. And so the tone at the end is, as you say, very different from what most people who've encountered me through my businesses would know. At the same time, I was 100% comfortable with every word that I said in that video. So I was trying to find this balance between my personal integrity and the truths that I believe, with a way of communicating them in a way that reaches the audience I was going to be speaking to. Which, by the way, that is while the tone might be different, that same process of finding that balance is what I do all of the time, which is why I sound, this way on the Healthier Tech podcast, and I don't sound like Joe Rogan, because that's not the audience for the Healthier Tech podcast.
Right. Yeah, that's thank you for, expanding on that a little bit. Cause yeah, I definitely wasn't expecting that when I first saw it. And I was like, whoa, all right then. Okay. And then I realized for myself, I was like, oh, for this audience, I was immediately recognizing that is the tone you see in, TV show news. It's that, like, there's an urgency, and I guess I never really thought about that as being kind of a tactic or a necessary thing. So let's step back a little bit, and let's talk about the first contact that you had with the show. Like, how did that come about? How did it happen?
I don't know if you recall this, Stephanie, but you texted me.
This.
Yeah.
Okay, let's let our audience in on how this happened.
So what happens is it's after work, and a ticket comes through the SYB help desk saying, I'm from Dr. Phil's show. I forget exactly what they said, but we want you on the show. And I guess you did some quick checking to see that the person who actually submitted the ticket looked like a real person, because we get lots of emails that are phishing and spammy. So you did that, and then you texted me, then I logged in, and because it sounded like a rush, I called the booking person back, and this is on Dr. Phil's staff. and we started talking. It turns out that that help desk ticket was one of several ways that this person had tried to reach out. I didn't realize that until the next morning when I had emails and LinkedIn notifications and all of this stuff.
Right.
But so we talked, and my initial reaction was, wow, it's cool that you're reaching out to me. I didn't say I have no interest in being on Dr. Phil, but I was like, okay, let me see if I can think of someone who would be good for you, is how I approached it. And then, and I said, I'll call you back by tomorrow morning. And I started thinking of other people, but at that point, you already knew. I told my brother, and he's like, so you were saying, you really got to do this.
Yeah, to me, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah, to me, it was not. To me, Dr. Phil isn't the same as Jerry Springer, but kinda, and so like, I don't think people have ever thrown chairs on Dr. Phil, but it's in that same genre. And I was like, I'm worried, but you're like, you got to do it. My brother was like, yeah, that sounds good. Samantha, my fiance, she saw both sides of it, kind of like I did. I talked to some neighbors. They're like, oh no, you got to do it. So I called the woman. I was like, oh man. I called the woman back. And and also I couldn't think of anybody to refer, because anyone I would want to refer would be a scientist, and they had said they don't want one. So I called back and I basically accepted, except that's the point at which I had to start doing the videos and so forth. But keep in mind, so this happened on a Monday,
Right.
And because of how far away from LA I live now, I had to leave my house on Wednesday, I believe it was. No, on Thursday. So, because I had to travel to the city on Thursday, then take a flight on Friday. Then on Saturday, I had to buy a new suit because my suit wasn't with me where I am.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing was kind of jam-packed. And during this whole process, I'm re-recording versions of that video. But anyway, that's how it came about. And then the recording was on the following Monday. So it was from Monday. The whole thing was 7 days.
Right. Yes. And I can say from my close proximity to all of this, it was a whirlwind of activity. So you had, you've already talked about the videos. Then we have the travel aspect, which I think is important. I think it's really kind of key to talk about that a little bit more. And we'll get into it, because that travel aspect did have a big effect on the day of the show and the following hours after. But let's talk a little bit more about like the pre-show let's talk a little bit more about the pre-show experience. So we talked about the video. What else do you
well, like I said,
is important?
Yeah, they'd said they didn't want a scientist on, and they didn't really want to talk about the science. They had also told me that I could talk about human embedded computing, which, as I say, is different from microchipping, particularly in a lot of ways, but particularly on the EMF emissions side. But then they also told me that Dr. Phil was a proponent of concerns around EMF and health, which so they had clearly led me to expect a different Dr. Phil than the one that I encountered on the show. Now, after the show, when I started talking to some other people, like some other podcast hosts of podcasts I've been on, they're like, oh yeah, that's what Dr. Phil does. And I guess I was naive. I don't think I went in totally naive. Like I said, in my mind, this is sort of the same genre as Jerry Springer. So I'm not an idiot. But at the same time, I guess I kind of believed what the producer was telling me. Like, she was so nice and earnest about it, and it was just so. But I guess my first clue. It really hit me when Dr. Phil asked me the first question. But the first clue I think I should have had is when they introduced me. They said, "And our next guest doesn't even use a microwave." Like I'm some kind of space alien for not using a microwave oven.
Right.
And then they told me, Dr. Phil will ask you the first question. So what I want you to do is prepare whatever you want to say in response to this question. And then that wasn't Dr. Phil's first question.
Right.
So that was, it's my first time on nationwide TV. It wasn't my first time on TV. I'd been on ABC in Las Vegas before, but it was my first time on nationwide TV. And I was just very focused on trying to prepare. The one thing I will say before the show that was a bit nerve-wracking is they take me from the hotel to the studio, and the first thing I have to do is a COVID test. And then I'm sitting there and I have to wait like a half hour for the results, along with all the other panelists. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, did I just travel all this way and it's going to be undone by a COVID test? So once I passed the COVID test, I felt all this relief, and they showed me to my dressing room and I got changed. And, I just started thinking about what I would say in response to that, first question that I was told to expect.
Right. Well, and so we've kind of talked a bit about kind of the lead up, and I feel like I mean, I'm so close to this situation and the topic that I know what this conversation is, and I know what your experience was. So I want to make sure that I'm being really thoughtful of the audience who's listening to this. Maybe at this point it's a good time to talk about kind of your overall experience, and then maybe we work backwards a little bit, because I feel like we're talking about all of these pieces that are leading to, will lead the audience to think it was one thing and maybe it was another, because they're getting the front to end. So why don't you explain to us kind of like a broader overall overview of the experience from your perspective?
Oh, well, that's obviously by its nature, a very broad question. It was an amazing opportunity. I got to reach a lot of people, and the coverage at the end. I mean, okay. The big takeaway that I had was kind of an illumination about how EMF is covered in the media. Now, part of this is just how shows like Dr. Phil approach any topic. But I think part of it is also specific to how EMF is. So I feel, did a lot of things to try to set me into a position where I would either erupt or sound like a crazy person. Mm-hmm. And they significantly, I would say, failed on that front. I think not only did I sound the most professional of anyone there, I also looked the most professional. But that's just me. Maybe I shouldn't be making those judgments on myself. But no, they didn't. I mean, so while I feel like I should have been more prepared to be tripped up by their show, and I wasn't. I also feel like I conducted myself in a lot of ways, and we can talk about the coverage, right? But in pretty successful ways. The one thing that I did start really thinking about, and this to me is what I think is my most important takeaway, and I also talk about this with Nick Pinot on an episode of his podcast that's coming out later this year, because that was after this taping. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about this, not in the context of Dr. Phil, just in general. There is a lot in the EMF space, and it's not just in the EMF space, but particularly from my perspective in the EMF space, there is a lot of preaching to the choir. I am used to talking to people who want to learn about this topic, right, not about who are interested in challenging me on this topic. And that's how marketing is these days. You seek out people who are open to your message. Otherwise, marketing is too difficult and expensive. And so what I'm trying to say is almost everyone in the EMF space has now years of experience of preaching to the choir and not nearly enough experience trying to be evangelizers to the non-converted. Now, I want to be 100% clear. There are people, and so like one example that we've had on the podcast is Dr. Deborah Davis, who's done a tremendous amount of work. She'll go anywhere, talk to anybody, be fully informed. I mean, she was, she went on Tucker Carlson. She's been on all sorts of she'll talk to anyone who will listen and get any coverage that she can. And so there are certain people, but when it comes to the types of people that we deal with, the types of people we have on our show, the shows we go on, the companies and influencers that we partner with, there is a lot of preaching to the choir. Now, I said it's not limited to EMF because, this is the Healthier Tech podcast and we like talking about tech in general and its impact on society.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is happening everywhere. And so everyone in every aspect of society is getting more and more practiced at preaching to the choir or talking within the silo.
You find your tribe. Yes, you find your tribe, and marketing is geared. That's exactly what we do. We find the people who are already talking about these things, the people who may be on the fence, they don't know, but they're open. Yeah. So we, and those are completely different conversations. That's completely, and I really appreciate that you recognize that your big takeaway for yourself personally and for the business, of course, is that you've been siloed, and there's a whole other opportunity that we just, haven't really, there's a whole untapped potential, and there are other people that there's other opportunities to speak about this, and that can hone your skills in speaking to anybody, anytime, and perhaps maybe not to the level of Dr. Davis, because she's amazing, and she speaks, like you said, she speaks to everyone. If anyone is interested, we've had her on our podcast. Go and look at some past episodes. But
I'm also not used to. Yeah, I'm also not used to attacking people, and other panelists. They weren't attacking me, but they were taking a very confrontational approach to me, even going so far as to just blatantly lie about facts. And I, in my olden days, I was on my high school mock trial team. I was in my college debate team. I had that kind of experience. But for the duration of my actual career, I hadn't had. So I have that experience in my background, but it has not been recently practiced. And I wasn't ready up with takedowns and polite takedowns, professional takedowns, but real.
Refute. We'll say refute.
Yeah.
Refute. And then
I got one in on the show that passed through editing, and it made it into the final show, and it made it into some of the coverage of the show. And the fact, I knew as soon as I said it that it was the best line I'd had in the whole episode. And the fact that it made it into coverage of the show shows me that it was. And, but I needed more like that. And I needed to kind of acclimate to the environment and get comfortable. And then that's, and I wasn't for the first big chunk of the show.
Since I'm aware of how this all went down, and we've talked extensively about this after, why would you say so here's this is the I know. The I know can answer any question about EMF. Well, and maybe you can't pull up the science.
No,
maybe there's not a citation in the top of your head, but
I can answer most questions that our customers have. Because when customer service can't answer them, they get forwarded to me.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's in the gamut though. So I've witnessed you responding to a gamut of questions about EMF. And I was surprised, that you felt unprepared. And I want to know why you felt unprepared.
Part of what frustrated me in the experience was that I wanted not only to take an SYB perspective on this, I wanted to take a Healthier Tech perspective on this. I mean, the microchipping guy who runs a microchipping company, he's there showing how if you shoot a microchip into your body, you can unlock your door. And, and we talked about this. It's like, I think this was your line. That's a problem we've solved. Like that's that doesn't help improve your life. So why are you, whatever additional risk that it brings to you, why are you bringing it on just to unlock your door when we have, these things called keys? And it was that. So I had come on the show both as the CEO of SYB and as the host of the Healthier Tech podcast, and the nature of the questioning pigeonholed me on the EMF side in a way that I didn't figure out a way to get out of on my feet. And so that is, I think, part of what was most frustrating to me, because that's the real message here. I mean, you and I always talk, there's no escaping EMF exposure. It's all about reducing these exposures and taking a cost benefit analysis as it comes to our relationship with technology. Meanwhile, they have this woman on who, the widow of the amazing Jonathan, the comedian who died young, and she had embedded, I think it was 24 magnets in her body, and she's talking about how it makes it easier to pick up the knives at Olive Garden. And like, that's a perfect opportunity to talk about, how we should be thinking about body augmentation and building cyborgs and things like that. And it just, it didn't happen. And so instead we ended up, at least my portion, focused totally on the EMF side, and with against a what I would say was a hostile panel that I was not expecting to be as hostile, and I just didn't react the way I know in retrospect I could have, and now I believe I will if given similar opportunities in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, what I'm getting at is you were, I'm not going to use the word groomed, but there was
you did
an
already in the intro.
I wasn't going to say groomed again.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but what I'm getting at is that there was an expectation. And I think if nobody had said anything to you about what to expect, you would have come more prepared. And I think those answers, the things that you say over and over again, almost daily, and the messaging that we have been saying for years now at SYB, would have been top of mind. But I feel like, and I know because of our conversations, that you were led to not be as prepared. And do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Well, no, I think we already have. I mean, I was told this isn't going to be about the science. We don't want a scientist. I was told I could talk about human embedded computing, not just microchips. Right. It all ended up being about microchips. I was led to believe that Dr. Phil was pro EMF. He was very clearly not pro EMF. And then it goes beyond that, right? So they had planted a guy in the audience to ask a question that I didn't know this, because basically we all have our assigned seats. I don't know if people know the format of the show, but at first everyone is in the audience. And then one at a time, as Dr. Phil builds the panel, you get called up and sit on the high chair like the adults. And so while I was in the audience waiting, I was seated next to this other gentleman. And I didn't realize that he was a plant. Because he was, and that's not me just making it up. I saw him posting about it later. And he was planted to ask whether, what are the concerns that microchipping is the mark of the beast? And look, if people want to believe that, they can believe that.
Right.
But I don't think it's a coincidence that they sat the EMF guy next to him, so that I was on camera when he got to ask his question about the mark of the beast. Now, again, people can believe what they want to believe, but my proximity to him and being in camera is a way of further delegitimizing my image even before I'm introduced and open my mouth.
Right. And I know there was another way that really bugged you, that you were a little delegitimized and that was the way that they introduced you. What is it called? The name card?
The lower third. Yeah. So
tell us about that.
Yeah. So part of the prep for the show was, hey, email us exactly how you want your name and title to appear on the lower third. So that's the graphic that appears when they introduce you and sometimes when you're talking. And so I sent back, R blank, CEO SYB, and host the Healthier Tech podcast. And they said, great, confirmed. Then on the show itself, Dr. Phil only introduces me as R. Everyone else got introduced with 2 names. For some reason, I only got introduced with 1.
Right.
But then when the show comes out, you see that the lower third also only says R. It doesn't say R. It doesn't have my last name. It doesn't have either one of the titles or positions that I'd sent in. And I thought that was kind of weird, especially when you you factor it in with the way I feel counter-prepped. And so the whole thing I felt was pretty weird. I feel like they were trying, because the funny thing is at the end of the day, Dr. Phil and I had the same position, and which is we don't want to get microchipped. But in the course of that, they wanted a guy to come on who they could then say, I don't agree with the EMF science. They could take whatever he said and say, I don't agree with the EMF science, which, by the way, he is really one of the only TV doctors left that says or believes that. Like Sanjay Gupta did a multi-part series on this. And while this other one, Dr. Oz may have lost quite a bit of legitimacy in the past
Right.
year, he's also talked about the serious health risks of cell phones. So Dr. Phil on this is an outlier. He is not as mainstream. And so that, I think, is factored into the coverage that we saw following.
Right.
So
Right.
there was 2 months in between the taping and when it actually came out. It was originally supposed to come out in November, finally came out in December. And after it came out, it got picked up. It got picked up
Yes.
by Fox News. It got picked up by the New York Post. It got picked up by other outlets. And they really took, I was surprised because I was expecting, because I see a lot, by the way, I've never watched Dr. Phil except in advance of this show. But I sometimes see these articles online like, Dr. Phil schools advocate of X, or Dr. Phil makes fool out of advocate of Y. And so for that whole 2 months, I spent thinking like, well, there's going to be articles that say that about me. But at the end, they all came out and they covered it. I mean, I would like them to have covered it more aggressively from the EMF side, but they really were fair about it. They're like, well, the microchipping guy said X, and then this guy who calls himself R says Y. And they did include a couple of good lines that I had made. Again, you may say I'm experienced at talking to people and having answers, but I'm not experienced at talking in sound bites in the way that I think I need to now, that because it was really just the sound bites that were picked up in the coverage. So at the end of the day, I think Dr. Phil's team, whether it was him or his team, they wanted someone that they could shake off their feet and get angry or get to sound crazy or something like that, and they didn't succeed at that. And at the coverage, I think, shows that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I just want to say, when I first found the article, the coverage, I started keying into the coverage. I was pleasantly surprised because I wasn't, we've been waiting for 2 months to see how this was going to be spun. And we're not stupid. We know how media can spin. So there's that expectation that there'll be some spin, but not knowing what it's going to be. And then coupled with the ways in which you were prepared to be, you were kind of goaded and prepared to not be the expert at the level that we all know you are. I was worried too. And I was so pleasantly surprised to see that the front of all of this coverage was you looking professional like you are, speaking clearly like you do. And yes, I know there were other things you could have said, but I think the way you were presented was anything but crazy. And it was you and the guy who is the
microchipping guy.
we just call him his real name is the microchipping guy. So
yeah, no, I forget his name.
I know, right?
And his company. He has he's CEO of a big microchipping company that's been around for a long time. So
you guys had this exchange, and that was what was picked up, and I think that's really interesting. Because it wasn't all the other things. It wasn't the mark of the beast, guy. It wasn't the lady with the magnets all over her body.
Yeah, or the privacy advocate.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't the guy who opens his Tesla with his arm embedded chip.
Oh, they got my dig at him.
They did.
Because at the end, Dr. Phil's like, I wouldn't do microchipping, but I would get a pacemaker. And I'm like, yeah, but that's life-saving technology, Right. That's not about opening your Tesla. And that was, and the Tesla guy looked exasperated as soon as I said it, but started laughing. After the show, he said, my parents say the same thing. They were like, don't do it. It'll give you cancer. And, but.
Sometimes parents might know a thing or two.
Yeah. But yeah, so that, and then, but yeah, so further to your point just now, Samantha, who obviously, lives with me and had to bear the brunt of my uncertainty for 2 months between when I got back from LA and when the episode came out. I told her, please don't watch the episode when it comes out. And the day it comes out, she's working late, and then she comes out of her office and she's like, I watched the episode. I have no idea what you were worried about. And my first reaction was, you watched the episode? I told you not to.
Right.
But then I processed what she actually said. And then, we started to see the coverage come through, and you watched it, and my brother watched it. And
yeah. And it was good. And again, just to kind of bring the audience, our audience into this, that uncertainty was a little debilitating at first because you don't know. And when you
and it's such a huge audience. I mean, it's such a huge audience. And even when the recording didn't go the way I wanted it or had expected it to, then I started thinking, well, if they're trying to make me like I literally had, I'm sure there's a small part of me that's going to have PTSD forever. I literally had Dr. Phil yelling at me on national TV. What studies? And, I didn't fold or yell or anything like that. And so when they didn't get what they wanted out of me, I spent the time worrying how they were going to edit it. Because I do know that, just like counterprepping or grooming, like you said, counter grooming is something they do. Deceptive editing is another thing that they do. But again, at the end of the day, I think the only thing they did in editing that was kind of weird was not include my name or title.
Yeah, and we can speculate about that for forever. But I in just in this conversation, like every time we talk about this, I have a new epiphany. But I feel like, in talking about this today, it seems like, just another way to delegitimize you. And because they didn't get what they want, I think they got to a degree, I do believe they got what they wanted because they chose you because you can speak and you can speak clearly. And they were excited about that because you don't want to get someone on the show and then have them be a limp noodle. You can't have that. So you could speak, but I think they also knew that you could be a very powerful speaker. And I think those little things like telling you not to know, you don't need to come prepared with studies. You don't need to cite studies. That's a huge thing because you would have, and we had talked about this that week, you were starting to start pulling some of the citations, and you stopped doing that. And part of that is this whole lead up of,
because I don't walk around. I don't know what people think of me, but I am not one of these autodidacts. I am not one of these people who walks around with the citations of thousands of studies. Tell me about cancer. Tell me EMF and cancer. Tell me about EMF and brain tumors. Tell me about EMF and prostate.
Well, and
what I do is I know that I stay familiar with where the science is and what it's talked about, and then, if I'm invited onto a podcast and they're like, I really want to talk about the impact on children, then I'll come prepared with this, certain specific studies to talk about. But I don't just walk around having memorized thousands of different scientific study citations. I know some people can do that. I am not one of those people. But I would say, for based following from your point, which is, they had wanted a certain outcome with me. I had wanted a certain outcome from the experience. I don't think either of us got what we wanted, but the coverage, the fact that the coverage was, balance is so misleading when it's when like we're talking about true things and the opposition isn't, balance becomes misleading. But the fact that the coverage was balanced at all shows that even though I feel like I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve, I was actually able, through my demeanor and the words that I chose, I was able to make at least some version of this messaging accessible to, literally millions of people.
Yes.
In a way that, had I either done what Dr. Phil wanted, it wouldn't have happened, or if I'd been too aggressive, it wouldn't have happened. So even though I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve, I feel like I did actually end up striking a balance that inched the ball forward. It didn't get us a first down,
right,
but it inched the ball forward, right, in the public awareness.
I think that's just to kind of try to wrap this up a little bit. I think that's all we can really hope for, right? You want to move the ball forward, and in addition, now you've learned how to be more prepared for these, and these things. I truly do believe these opportunities will start to come.
Yeah, we'll see. I agree that inching the ball forward is a win. I really, in retrospect, I should have been able to clean the stage with those people, because they weren't like, it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't like a pacemaker manufacturer that was there saying, oh, here's life-saving technology. It was like, oh, here, unlock a door. And it's like, it's so inane to me that people are willing to take steps towards becoming cyborgs when they're, for that amount of value in exchange, I should. So I do feel like I should be in a position. And again, I feel like, as with everything, my second webinar was better than my first. My third was better than my second. Exactly. So it's not like the next opportunity I'll be amazing, but I definitely will be more prepared to execute on my vision of how I'd like things to turn out than I was this go around. It was sort of like, diving in, not knowing how to swim and diving into the deep end, or
100%.
Yeah. And so,
as much as I wanted you to do it, I was like, I'm so glad it's not me.
Yeah. But the other thing is that the takeaway, and this is maybe a good place to end on, is back to this preaching to the choir thing, this this silo thing. I feel like more of us in the EMF space, but obviously I only control myself, I should get more experience speaking not to the choir. And again, I want to be clear, not everyone suffers from this problem, but basically a majority do, because that's who's willing to tune in. That's who finds you through SEO. That's who subscribes to you on Facebook, or however you're reaching people. And so almost everyone is very well practiced at preaching to the choir, and only very few have a lot of experience talking to skeptics. Like we've already mentioned Dr. Davis. My father was very well known for taking on anybody. There's videos of him talking to planning commissions and the EU Parliament and the Canada Parliament, and all of these people who are very skeptical about these things. He was like, whatever, I'm just going to go and I'm going to talk about the science. But in general, we don't have, and so and if anyone listening has ideas, if you disagree with me and you want to set up an interview to kind of go head to head, or if you know of ways to find opponents where we can have legitimate, non-skewed debates on these issues, I think that's where I very much would like to see. It's just not easy to, if you sit down and think, okay, I want a debate opponent on this topic, it's just not easy to just make it happen. So I would very much like to see something like that increasingly happen this year.
And honestly, if Microchip guy listens to this, contact us.
Yeah,
We'd love to have
we'd probably
you on.
have a better chance if we'd remembered his name.
Yeah, we'll find it.
We'll put it in the show notes. We'll say
And we'll put it in the back end in the SEO in case
Yeah.
he Googles himself ever. Because no, I do think there's a lot of value in speaking to people who are skeptical, and I think there's more value if it's in a so if anyone does go out and watch the video of some of the coverage, I think you'll see that it was it does seem very balanced, and I think it was also very respectful. So you guys disagreed but you were both very respectful to each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's
And the coverage
type
was
of
respectful
stuff.
to both of us.
Exactly. And
So
I think
that
yeah. And I see value in those sorts of discussions and debates of different ideas, not in a battle, like you
Mhm.
must believe what I believe. And I feel like that's useless. That's the Jerry Springer stuff. And that's I think the tone that Dr. Phil's show was kind of looking for that, and they didn't get it. So
Yeah.
haha, and good job. Like, good job, Art. Good job. You beat the machine, and you didn't know, really what you were getting into.
And again, along those same lines, good job, Steph. Good to know that if I catch COVID again, we don't need to reschedule interviews. You can just take the seat.
That is not what you should be taking.
Yeah. Our producer's on. He's hearing this, so he now knows how good you are at this. So thank you very much for hosting this episode and leading this discussion. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was good, and I'm glad we get to talk about this because I think our audience is going to love it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Healthier Tech Podcast. Remember to check the show notes for all the links and resources mentioned in the show. Please like and subscribe to the Healthier Tech Podcast on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice. Get your free quick start guide to building a healthier relationship with technology and our latest information at healthiertech.co.